Well, welcome to this year's edition of the Argonne Training Program on Extreme Scale Computing. I think this will be an exciting couple of weeks for you. Pretty tiring one, as you might expect given our schedule. But I hope you will find it worthwhile. So thought I'd give you just a little bit of a glimpse for those of you who are not familiar with the Department of Energy's National Laboratory system. There are many national laboratories that are DOE National Labs, and Argonne is one of them. So there's Livermore, Berkeley, Oak Ridge, Los Alamos, Sandia. Some of you are from some of those labs. And then some others that are not as well known, like Bettis and Capel. But Argonne, which is about 30 miles from here, was established in 1946, right after the Second World War, as a follow-on to the metallurgic lab at the University of Chicago that in 1942 created the first sustained nuclear reaction by Enrico Fermi. And Enrico Fermi was fundamental in establishing Argonne. And the main purpose initially at Argonne was to study how to use nuclear power for electricity, for energy. Soon after that, it became obvious that to do that, you needed to have expertise not only in physics, but also in materials. And if you use computing, you needed mathematics and later computer science. And so it's a multi-purpose lab. Nowadays, energy science is still a big emphasis at Argonne. A lot of battery research goes on there. For example, the batteries that are used in the Chevy Volt were developed at Argonne. Many of the materials that go into those lithium-ion batteries, and they're licensed to General Motors and some other companies. We also worry about the environment. And there are also major user facilities, as is shown in the bottom of this slide on the left. There's the advanced photon source, which is a very intense X-ray source. And one of the user facilities is our big IBM BlueGene Q called Mira that some of you will be using during this training program, and a lot of other ones. So I could go on for a long time, but I just wanted to give you a glimpse of an idea of Argonne. Now, Argonne has been involved in using computers for a very long time. In fact, when John von Neumann at Princeton designed a computer, some people at Argonne found out about it, asked if they could have the early plans for that computer, got them, and started building it. And in fact, had it running before Princeton had its own computer running. So it's the AVIDAC, Argonne's version of the Institute's, because von Neumann was at the Institute for Advanced Sciences, digital arithmetic computer. And you can see that it was really fast. Memory access time, 15 microseconds. You could do a multiplication in a millisecond. So as the press release said, 100,000 times as fast as a trained computer using a desk calculator, because computer was actually a job title at that time. In fact, Margaret Butler, who was one of the early computers, she was a mathematician, helped design parts of both AVIDAC, and then Oak Ridge National Lab found out about AVIDAC and said, gee, we'd like to have one of those. And so Argonne designed Oracle, and it was then installed at Oak Ridge. And it was even faster. It could do 2,000 operations a second. So why are we here? Well, those of us who've been involved in computational science, including many of you, are well aware that the days of relatively simple computer architectures and choice of maybe 2 languages, maybe Fortran and C, are unfortunately behind us, at least for a long time. Computers, the architecture is pretty complex, and the software environment is equally complex. And furthermore, because the computers are so powerful, people are trying to model and simulate very complex problems in physics, chemistry, astrophysics, engineering, fluid flows, combustion. So the application itself is extremely complex, and the systems you operate on is also complex. And a lot of the time now, what you do is work in teams. And so it isn't just one person, sitting somewhere writing the software, but you have to have teams and then coordinate among the teams and figure out standards for interfaces, for documentation. And so those are a lot of skills, knowing the hardware, knowing the software environments, and knowing how to contribute to these large complex codes. Those are things that often are not taught at universities. If you're getting a PhD in the sciences, typically, of course, you're encouraged to implement something computationally, get it done, finish your dissertation, and go to your postdoc. And so there isn't time to look into some of the things that are now, I believe, pretty much essential for almost anyone who does computational science and engineering at the high end. Now, some computational work doesn't need big computers, and it can be wonderful science. This course, as you might expect, we call it extreme scale computing. Our focus is specifically on the big machines of today and tomorrow. Now, Department of Energy did establish in 2004 what they call the Leadership Computing Facility, and it has two centers, one at Argonne and one at Oak Ridge. And the idea was to provide computational data science resources for very complex engineering scientific problems, and they're available to people around the world. But in any case, there are two big machines, Mira at Argonne and Titan at Oak Ridge. And I was saying that these are fairly complex, and so Mira, for example, has 49,000 nodes, but each node has 16 cores, so you have 750,000 cores roughly, and each core has 4 hardware threads. So if you were using all of Mira and all the threads, you'd be doing about 3 million things simultaneously. That has its own complexity. The Cray, called Titan at Oak Ridge, has fewer nodes, but when you get down to the number of cores, about 300,000, and with one GPU for each core, the amount of parallelism within each GPU is quite extensive as well. And so that's complex to program in addition. A little bit more detail on Mira and other systems. So we have, I already mentioned Mira is probably enough on that, but we have other systems that are smaller. So Vesta, which is only 2,048 nodes, and although I don't have it on this slide, Cetus, which has 4,096 nodes. We'll say more about that later during the crash course. Often the results of these calculations are complex enough that you need to visualize them or analyze them. And so we have a Tukey, which is a cluster with NVIDIA GPUs as well as Intel CPUs. And you need a lot of storage. So a cartoon of the ecosystem for Mira is you have the big machine, but then you have 2 smaller machines where people can run smaller jobs, maybe in preparation for running on Mira itself. These 3 systems share this file system and tape library. And then there's Vesta, which is, these are all BlueGene Q, this one, Cetus, and Mira, and it's on a separate file system. All of these are connected to the rest of the world with a network at 100 gigabits a second. So you'll be using possibly Tukey, Cetus, and Vesta. Vesta is going to be the system we will want you to do most of your work on for reasons that we'll explain later. But you will also have the opportunity to run on Mira if you have jobs that warrant it. I won't go into this in any real detail, but just to remind you again of the complexity of the systems. This is a single chip with about 1.5 billion transistors. And so it's got 16 user-accessible cores or processors, but then level 1 cache, level 2 cache. with different sharing policies and router logic all integrated into the same chip. So it's a fairly complex piece of hardware, and we have 49,000 of those tied together in a 5-dimensional torus network. Okay, so those are today's machines, a glimpse at them. But what about tomorrow's? Well, 3 laboratories of the Department of Energy, Oak Ridge, Argonne, and Livermore, together put out a request for proposals last winter to start the process for buying our next machines. Mira was installed in 2012, so 2 years ago. It went into production in April of 2013, but we're already worrying about what's the next machine going to be. And so the procurement was for a system to be installed, a separate one at each of the 3 laboratories, in the year 2017 or 18. So if it's 2018, that's about 4 years from now. Now, I can't give you any real detail on those systems yet because the contracts have not been signed, but there will continue to be at least 2 different architectural paths, just as Titan at Oak Ridge is a very different architecture from Mira. There will continue to be 2 different architectures because we want to be able to follow both of the main paths of architecture for the future. And so for each of the systems, and in particular, our next system now has the code name just ALCF3. Mira's ALCF2, strangely enough, is to acquire and deploy a 75 to 200 petaflop system. So Mira is 10 petaflops peak, so we're talking about a substantial increase in speed. Now, Mira's predecessor was a BlueGene P, which was about half a petaflop. So from P to Q, we went up a factor of 20. So it's not unreasonable to think we might go up another factor of 20. So what we know is it will be a lot bigger. And as people talk about exascale, if you get to 200 petaflops, well, now it's only another factor of 5 to get to exascale. So in my opinion, which is not shared by everyone, as we get this next set of systems, we will have a reasonably good idea of what the exascale systems will be like, maybe in 2022, in the year 2022. And the expectation is that the nodes will have more and more cores. So as I mentioned, the BlueGene Q has 16 cores. Well, one glimpse into that is a system that another lab of the Department of Energy, Berkeley lab, has in its facility called NERSC. They have announced their next system, which is coming in just mid-2016, just a couple of years from now. And it'll be based on the Intel Knights Landing processor, and that has been announced as having 72 cores. So you can see that the nodes will have more and more cores, almost certainly. The total number of nodes may not increase tremendously, but the node rather, will be more complex. And so you can imagine, I think the estimate is that Knights Landing will have a peak speed of 3 teraflops in a single node. So that's what you can look forward to in the very near future. And those cores each have 4 threads in the case of the Knights Landing. So if you think of programming both MPI and OpenMP, that will continue for the foreseeable future to be one of the main ways that you program. And so the lessons in this training program, pretty much starting late tomorrow afternoon and all day Tuesday, Wednesday, and part of Thursday, we'll do a lot on MPI, OpenMP, hybrid programming for that reason, because those are the kinds of tools that we will be using, that you will be using in your careers for the next few years. So as you hopefully know by now, but I'll just refresh your memory, we organize the curriculum in 7 broad areas, call them tracks, sometimes we call them sessions. And each one has 1 or 2 leaders. So one is on hardware architectures, and Pete Beckman is leading that track. And that starts tomorrow morning at 8:30. Programming models and languages are several days. Rusty Lusk and Rajiv Thakur are leading that, and it involves, as I mentioned, MPI and OpenMP at an advanced level. But also, you'll be exposed to things like Chapel and PGAS languages and others, Charm++, for example. Now, most of the work that you do in science and engineering relies heavily on mathematical models, of course. That means you need to worry about numerical algorithms and software and libraries of such for meshing, solving equations. And so we have a day and a half on that, on those topics. And Lois McInnes and Lori Diachin are leading that. Lois is an Argonne staff member. Lori is a Livermore staff member. Toolkits and frameworks. Here I'm referring to debuggers and performance measurement tools for highly parallel programs. And Kalyan Kumaran and Scott Parker, two of the Argonne staff members, are leading a session on that. Mike Papka and Joe Inslee on visualization and data analysis for a half day, and then a full day on data-intensive computing and I/O. You probably have already experienced the fact that on big parallel machines, almost always, I/O is a big bottleneck, especially if you're taking a big code that's previously was running at lesser parallelism. And so the idea was maybe each core is going to write its own file, and when you have close to 1 million cores, that tends to end up being a bottleneck. And then community codes and software engineering, led by Catherine Riley and Anshu Dubey. And as I mentioned earlier, so there'll be 2 days of that. Community codes are getting to be a very important aspect of computing at the high end, because that means you have longevity of the code, and if they're open source and are indeed a community code, people can continually add enhancement to it to be able to treat different kinds of science phenomena, and you have a whole team of experienced people evolving them to go on the next architecture as well. And that requires good software engineering, and so we want to expose you to that as well. So that's the high-level view. Now, in addition, to keep you amused, each dinner, starting tomorrow dinner, there'll be a talk on a different topic. Now, many of them are scientific, and many of them perhaps you'll never get involved in yourselves, but I hope that you will find them at least interesting and find it useful to be aware that people are doing that kind of research. So there'll be some on biology, some on urban science, and a number of other topics. Now, during dinner tonight, I will subject you to a brief presentation, but it's not really like one of these dinner talks. These are typically 30 minutes. So you get to start dinner at 5:30, very early, I know, for many of us, but you'll get used to it. And so when you've had most of your meal, then I will start the dinner speaker, and that will go on for about 30 minutes. And then, of course, you get to come back up here for hands-on sessions most nights. Now, tonight, instead of hands-on, we have something different. So as I have already alluded to, now each day you have a lot of lectures and then an evening of hands-on sessions. And you know, if it were up to me, this would be a 6-week course, and we would have plenty of material. But you know, we have to shrink it. Most people don't feel they can take that many weeks away from their normal work or families. Now, we will post slides online as soon as available, which typically is very soon, usually the same day that they're presented. Of course, I want to thank the Department of Energy, the part of DOE that's called the Office of Science, and within that office, there's the Office of Advanced Scientific Computing Research. Now, that's the office that funds the big machines at Argonne, Oak Ridge, and NERSC. It funds the 100 gigabit network that connects many of the national laboratories and some universities. And they also have a research component to do research in mathematics and computer science. They provide the funding for this program. So without them, we couldn't do it. So I was able to get 3 years of funding. Last year was the first. This is the second. So we'll do it again for certain next year. And I think it's likely we'll ask for funding for subsequent years. Now, we would like you to help us improve the program. So we will be providing online surveys for you to fill out to evaluate different parts of the program. We did this last year with paper evaluations instead of online. And we combed through all the comments that were made, and we used those to make some adjustments to both the curriculum and to the logistics. So it's worth your while, and certainly it will help us if you do that. So for example, about a week ago, I sent an email to all of you with suggested reading before the course. That was a suggestion from the evaluations last year. And the second one is that people wish that there had been an introduction opportunity for all the participants, all of you, to say something about yourselves to the others, as opposed to just during the weeks gradually find out, oh, you're doing research similar to mine, or maybe we could talk about our own research. So I'll give you some details during dinner tonight as to how we will organize that. In brief, after dinner, there'll be a reception, and we'll all come back up here, and I'll give you the details on how we stage for each of you to come up here for 1 minute, no more, and say something about yourselves. Just as, I gave you this sample. In my case, I like sailing, so I put up a picture of a sailboat. But you don't have to have a slide. You can just come up here and talk. So I want to thank you for taking 2 weeks of a summer to participate in this program. And I look forward to meeting more of you and our interactions during the next 2 weeks. Are there any questions from anyone before we go to Ray? Yes?
Will the slides go on the general ATPESC website or elsewhere?
Thank you for the question. Yeah, so the slides as we get them, the way we did it last year, I'm sure we'll do it that way this year. If you go to the Agenda 2014, you will see that the title of the slide will become a link. And so you'll be able to just click on the link and download the PDF version of the slides.